the Indian Sale of Goods Act 1930. This act is meant for the, it is only for the mercantile law, I mean for the mercantile activities. So it involves the seller, purchaser, the products, the rule for fixing the price and everything. So it came into existence in the year 1930, in the month of 2nd July, during the British period. And this act is applicable to the territory of India, but except Jammu and Kashmir. But after the amendment was made in this act in the year 1930, on September 23rd, this act was amended to the Sale of Goods Act 1930. Originally, it was the Indian Sale of Goods Act 1930. But after the amendment of 1930 in the month of September 23rd, it is amended as the Sale of Goods Act 1930. So this act is specially for it is for the mercantile activity, like the buying of goods, the selling of goods. It includes buyer, seller, especially it includes the products, the rules for fixing the price, the condition, warranty, the rules relating to delivery of goods and everything. So this is specially for the mercantile activity. So in the previous chapter, we have seen that I think we have seen in bailment that there will be a transfer of goods from one party to another party. There will be a price, but ownership will not transfer. I hope you all remember. So ownership will not transfer from one party to another party. There will be a transfer of product. There will be a transfer of goods from one party to another party for a specific purpose. So once the purpose is solved, he has to return the goods. That is what we have seen in bailment. So if you take pledge, it is also for a specific purpose. It is for getting loan or it is for debts. So the specific reason is for debts. So you should always keep in mind that there is a vast difference between bailment, pledge and the Sale of Goods Act. Because in bailment and pledge, the ownership will not transfer. Okay, the ownership will not transfer, but when you take Sale of Goods Act, it speaks about the transfer of ownership. So the goods transfer from one party to another party along with the title of the goods, along with the clear title of the goods. So that is what we are going to see under this chapter, the Sale of Goods Act. Okay, let us see the definition of Sale of Goods Act. The Sale of Goods Act 1930, and section 2 subclass 1 says that who is a buyer. Okay, so entirely section 2 defines the entire thing, like who is a buyer, what is delivery, how a product should be, what should be the title of the goods, what is the remedy for fault, what is future goods, what is specific goods. Everything is discussed in the section 2. So section 2 subclass 1 says that who is a buyer. It defines about the buyer. So buyer is the one who agrees to buy the goods. Fine. So section 2 subclass 2 says about the delivery, how the delivery should be made. So once you put the custody of, once you transfer the custody or once you transfer the possession of goods from one person to another person, so it leads to delivery of goods. Fine. So the third one is like it speaks about the deliverable state, how it should be, the goods which is delivered by the seller and what should be the state of the goods which is delivered by the buyer. So it speaks that it should have the mercantile, quality. Fine. Section 2 subclass 4 says about the document of title. Subclass 5 is about the fault. Fault means any default or any error relating to the sale of goods. Section 2 subclass 6 is about future goods. Future goods is nothing but when a goods is not in a deliverable state, when a goods is not ready at the moment, it falls under the category of future state. So future goods. So it is, everything is section 2 subclass 7 says about what is goods and who is an insolvent. Everything is discussed in brief in section 2. Okay. So let us see what is sale, the difference between sale and agreement to sell. Okay, the word itself, you can understand that what is sale. Sale is nothing but once the sale is over, once the goods is transferred from one party to another party for a price, it is called a sale. But agreement to sell is when there is an agreement to exchange the goods in future, it is agreement. It is merely an agreement, whereas if you take sale, it is the it is a executed agreement, whereas the agreement to sell is a executory. You will be executing the contract in the future period, not immediately. Fine. So from the name itself, you can understand that what is the difference between sale and agreement to sell. So sale is when the transfer takes place from one party to another party, and when the ownership transfer from one person to another person for a price, even it may be a credit, or it may be the payment may be made in future, that is secondary. But when the goods transfer from one party to another party for a price, it is called a sale. But for exchanging the goods in future, it is an agreement to sell. So the first thing, this is the first main difference between sale and agreement to sell. The second one is like, it is executed contract, whereas sale of agreement to sale is executory. You are going to execute the contract in future, not immediately. But whereas if you take the sale, it is a immediate process. Fine. The third one is like, a contract of sale may be absolute and or conditional. Even it can be absolute or conditional, but when you take an agreement to sell, there will not be any agreement, or there will not be any conditions, or it is not absolute. Fine. The fourth difference is the one, under a contract of sale, the property in the goods is transferred from the seller to buyer. The contract is called sale, where the transfer of property in the goods is to take place in future time or subject to some condition thereafter to be fulfilled. The contract is called as agreement to sell. See, for example, like when I'm entering into contract, I'm saying that for example, I am approaching a motor vehicle. I am approaching some like a car showroom. I am requesting them. I made a payment, but I'm requesting I am requesting the car showroom that once I make ready of the place to park my car, then only the showroom can deliver the goods. It means that there is a condition. Fine. So if there is any condition, it falls under the category of sale. So certain things, if the buyer has to fulfill, then only the seller can sell the goods and deliver the goods. Okay, there are certain conditions involved in the sale. An agreement to sell becomes a sale when the time elapses or the conditions are fulfilled, subject to which the property in the goods is to be transferred. So you can see the sale, the sale never converted to agreement to sell, but the agreement to sale can be converted to sale once the property is delivered. Clear? So the sale can never be converted to agreement to sell, but whereas the agreement to sell can be converted to sale after the delivery of particular product. Fine. I'll tell you the important difference alone, and the risk of the goods transfer from the buyer to seller, seller to buyer immediately. Okay. See, if I am purchasing something, okay, the day I purchase, the day the ownership transferred to the buyer, the ownership, the risk on the goods travel along with the ownership. Fine. So if something happens to my goods, see, I am purchasing something. Okay. If something happens to my goods, I have to take the responsibility if the purchase is already over. So the risk along with the ownership transfer from buyer to seller to buyer. But when you take agreement to sell, only the ownership transfer, the risk will not transfer from seller to buyer. Then when will the risk transfer to seller to buyer? Only on the day of transferring the possession from seller to buyer. Fine. So these are all the things you have to keep in mind when you talk about sale and agreement to sell. So this is the vast difference between the sale and agreement to sell. Okay. And okay. Next, let us see about the hire purchase agreement. Okay. Hire purchase agreement is nothing but it is distinguished from actual sale. Okay. I already told you in the class that I may retain the custody of the goods. See, for example, if I'm purchasing something by obtaining loan from any bank like HDFC or ICICI, okay, I'm holding the custody of the goods, whereas I can hold the custody of the goods alone. I cannot claim title. I cannot claim ownership of that particular goods. Clear? So when can you claim the ownership? You can claim the ownership until you pay the entire EMIs. You cannot claim ownership on the goods. If you clear the debts, you will be the owner of the goods. But until you pay the entire debts, you cannot claim the ownership on the particular goods. Clear? So that is what this concept is. So hire purchase agreement. Hire purchase agreement is also an agreement which says that like it gives only the usage right to the one who is holding the custody of the goods. Okay. Okay. Whether you can sell the goods which is in the hands of the user, the one who is using the goods, no, you cannot, because later I'll clarify your doubts. Okay, let me complete this and you can please note down all your questions. Later I'll clarify your doubts. Okay, fine. So just always keep in mind that when I am holding custody of the goods, but I have not paid the entire debts to the bank, but I'm holding only the custody of the goods. Okay, can I sell the goods to third party? Obviously, I cannot I cannot sell the goods to third party because I am not the owner of the goods, because you have not paid the entire debts to the bank. So you cannot claim or you cannot sell the goods to third party unless you clear the entire debts. In case if you sell the goods, it means you're committing a criminal offense. Clear? So because it is not your goods, the goods belongs to someone else. You just have the right of using it, you have no rights to sell the goods. Clear? So the hire purchase agreement should be distinguished from an actual sale. In an actual sale, the buyer immediately becomes the owner of the goods, which are in the subject matter of the sale. Yes, when you purchase the goods, if I purchase something, if I'm purchasing some cell phone, I become the immediate owner. But if the same, the subject matter is cell phone, but I'm purchasing the cell phone for EMI. Can I claim ownership? I cannot claim ownership because it is through the hire purchase system. Okay, that is the reason why, like you can see the endorsement in many RC books and all. You can see if you have RC book, just go through. If you would have like in case if you have purchased that particular vehicle through any loan system, okay, like there will be an endorsement called hypothecation, in which in that RC book it will be mentioned that it is hypothecated with so and so bank. Fine. So it is an attachment, so this kind of attachment can stop the innocent purchaser from purchasing the goods. Clear? So if there is no endorsement, like I will not have the clear idea whether this particular vehicle belongs to this person or it belongs to someone else. Even the RC book may be in the name of the holder, but the original owner, the title will be it will be on the one who lent for the goods. Clear? So in a hire purchase agreement, however, the owner retains his ownership and gives the hirer only a right to use the chattel in consideration of periodical payment to be paid by the hirer. So it is the duty of the hirer to pay the periodical payment, I mean the installment. Okay. So these periodical payment are no doubt installment of price, and the hirer has the option to become the owner by paying all the installment stipulated for under the hire purchase system. Stipulation is nothing but condition. So when there is a condition that this person, when you obtain a loan from any bank, you have to pay the date will be fixed by the bank. So it is the stipulation that you have to pay your EMI on the stipulated date fixed by the bank. So it is the duty of the hirer to pay the EMI within the stipulated time in order to avoid problems in the future. So the hirer may may eventually become the buyer. Then until this happens, that there is no transfer of property from the owner to the hirer. Then there will be no transfer of ownership from the owner to the hirer. Owner here is bank. The money lender. The hirer is the one who is having the custody of the property. So the owner will not transfer the custody of the property in case if there is any default by the hirer. So in this case, you can see in Sundaram Finance Co. versus the State of Kerala, it has been observed that in a hire purchase agreement, there is nothing like buying goods. The hirer being under no obligation to buy, but having an option to return the goods or become its owner by payment in full of the agreed hire installment and the price for exercising the option. So it means that like there is no obligation that you have to pay. Okay, just there is no obligation that you have to pay, but keep in mind that if you pay, then only you can claim ownership. There is no obligation that you have to pay. Fine. If you pay, you can claim ownership. If not, like the bank will take the custody of the goods. So it is the duty of you. Okay, it is a duty. No, the bank cannot insist you to make payment. Instead, the bank can take the custody of the goods with them. Clear? So it is your duty to make payment in a stipulated time. So the essence of sale is that the property is transferred from seller to the buyer with a whether paid at once, where the contract of sale is made except in the case of conditional sale. Hire purchase agreement are not conditional sales. In hire purchase agreement, as its very name implies, there is an element of sale which okay. So the insolvency and one more thing, it is this hire purchase system talks about the insolvency of the hirer. So this insolvency will not affect the ownership. Okay, this will not hire the in case if I have paid the entire loan to the bank. Okay, my last installment is over. I have paid the entire installment. Okay, but after paying the entire installment, the hirer becomes insolvent. By considering this, the bank cannot seize the vehicle by stating that the hirer become insolvent, because the entire amount is paid by the bank. Even if there is any pendency, even if there is any due by the hirer, the bank can sue against the legal heirs of the hirer, even at the death of the hirer, or if the hirer become insolvent, the bank can sue against the legal heirs of the hirer in order to collect the debts from the hirer legal heirs. Okay. So, but if you take Sale of Goods Act, if you take sale, if there is any, for example, like I am entering into contract with the buyer that I will deliver goods on on May 15th. Okay, but on May 13th, I am ready to deliver the goods. I am ready with the goods. The goods are ready to dispatch. On May 13th, I get to know that the hirer become the purchaser become insolvent. Okay. So you can exercise right of lien if there is any pendency, or if there is any due by the seller, by the buyer. In case if there is no due by the buyer, it is the duty of the seller to return the goods. It is the duty of the seller to deliver the goods to the legal heirs of the insolvent purchaser, or deceased purchaser, legal heirs of the deceased purchaser. Clear? Okay. Now let us move on to kinds of goods. Okay, there are three types of goods. One is specific goods. The second one is future goods, and the third one is contingent goods. So these three are the important types of goods. The specific goods is nothing but section 214 and section 19 of the Sale of Goods Act says about what is specific goods. So specific goods is very simple that when the goods is ready to deliver, okay, when the goods is identified, it falls under the category of specific goods. For example, I'm approaching, uh, I'm going to, for example, I'm going to a mobile showroom. I am identifying any particular brand. Okay, my brand is, and also the mobile which I'm going to purchase, and even I'm making advance. Okay, I am making a 5,000 or 10,000 as an advance for that specific mobile. It means I have identified. Okay, so the goods which is identified, the goods which is ready to deliver falls under the category of specific goods. See, for example, I am running a mill. Okay, purchaser is approaching me and he is requesting me for the delivery of goods, for the delivery of 50 bags of rice. But he cannot, because I have 500, for example, I have 500 bags of rice, okay, which cannot be identified. Can he identify that this 5 bag is my goods for which I have entered into, for which I have made payment? He cannot. Fine. So that is the reason why agreed upon at the time of a contract. So the goods which can be identified, and the goods sometimes the goods which cannot be identified also comes under the specific goods, but the condition is it should be ready for the delivery. Fine. So it should be ready for the delivery. It should be ready for the immediate transfer of possession of goods from the seller to the buyer. Fine. So section 2 subclass 14 of the Sale of Goods Act 1913 defines specific goods as goods identified and agreed upon at the time a contract of sale is made. Section 19 states that where there is a contract for the sale of specific or ascertained goods is nothing but the goods which is identified. Okay, goods, the property. See, you can sue when a goods is identified. Okay, for example, like there are 5 cars in the showroom. Okay, it's a second-hand cars showroom. I am approaching the showroom. I am identifying the particular car, particular model, particular specification, and I made an advance. Okay. In case if the seller is selling the goods to the third party after making advance, okay, now you can sue against the seller for violating the contract, for breaching the contract. But when the goods is not identified, when there is a 500 bags of dal, okay, you have entered into agreement for 5 bags, you cannot sue against the seller for selling remaining 495 bags. You're getting my point? So you can sue when the goods is identified. In case if the seller is selling the goods which is identified by you, okay, to the third party, even you will even you have the remedy before the court that even if it is not identified, in case if the buyer is selling entire 500 dal bags to some other client, then you can sue against the seller for not allotting, for not delivering the goods which is paid by you. Clear? So section 19 states that where there is a contract for the sale of a specific or ascertained goods, the property in them is transferred to the buyer at such time as the party to the contract intended to be transferred. For the purpose of ascertaining the intention of the parties, regard shall be had to the terms of the contract, the conduct of the parties, and the circumstance of the case. Unless a different intention appears, the rules contained in section 20 to 24 are for ascertaining the goods. So section 20 to 24 says about how to ascertain the goods. Okay. So section 20 says that it should be in a deliverable state. So when the goods is identified, it should be in a deliverable state. You should not say that I will manufacture, I'll manufacture the goods and I'll deliver the goods in later period. If so, it falls under the category of future goods. If it is a specific goods, if it is identified by you, it should be in a deliverable state. That is what section 20 says. Okay. So the second category is future goods. So future goods is nothing but goods which is yet to be manufactured, falls under the category of future goods, which is not ready for the delivery of the goods, which is not ready to deliver, but it will be ready in the future period. So these kind of goods falls under the future goods. Right now, in case if you are approaching any medical, okay, or any chemical industry for hand sanitizer, okay, if they are telling that right now there is a demand for the hand sanitizer, we will manufacture the hand sanitizer and we will supply the manufacturer. In case if they are assuring, it falls under the category because it is not ready to deliver, it is not ready to transfer the possession from one person to another person, but it will be delivered in the future period. Clear? So it will be delivered in the future period. So these things, the thing which is not ready to deliver immediately, but which is yet to be manufactured in the future period, falls under the category of future goods. And the third category is contingent goods. So contingent goods is a goods which is it's a type of a future goods. Okay, like it may or it may not happen. It depends upon the happening of an event. Clear? So it depends upon the happening. For example, like A is entering into contract with B. Okay, A is telling that if I win the case, the contract is for purchasing of any movable goods. Okay, the A is assuring that the movable goods is in the it is in dispute. Okay, it is before the case is pending before the judiciary. Now A is assuring that if I win the case, I will sell the movable goods to you. So there is it means that this kind of goods, okay, you can easily say that it depends upon the happening of an event. If I win, I can transfer the custody of the goods. If I lose, the purchaser cannot sue against me for not selling or for not delivering the goods, because these kinds of goods depends upon the happening of an event. Okay, if that particular property is in the case, if it is before any judiciary, or if there is any dispute, okay, for the title, unless a clear opinion, unless a clear judgment is given by the judiciary, pronounced by the judiciary, you cannot claim ownership or you cannot sell the goods. Fine. So this kind of goods depends upon the happening of an event. If that thing happened, then you can do. For example, if I'm telling that okay, I'll sow pineapple in my land. In case if my land is suitable for pineapple, I'll sell the goods. In case if my land is not suitable for pineapple, then he cannot sue against me for not supplying pineapple. So this thing depends upon the happening of an event. Fine. The next topic is mercantile agent. We have discussed about the mercantile agent in the class, about the agency. So mercantile agent is the one who acts on behalf of the principal, okay, and who acts in between the principal and the third party. If customarily in the course of his business, he has authority to sell the goods of the principal, or consign them for sale, or to buy goods from the principal, or to raise money on the security of such goods, is called as agent. So the agent is the one who acts on behalf of the principal, and he can sell the goods during the course of business. He can hold the custody of the goods during the whole course of business. He can sell the goods. He can enter into contract for selling the goods on behalf of the principal. An ordinary agent who has no authority to sell cannot give a good title to the purchaser. So the one who is not having the proper authority, I mean, if he's not having the proper authority, in case an agent is not having the proper authority, he cannot give a clear title to the purchaser. For example, I have not appointed any uh, I have not appointed any um, agent. Okay, but B himself is, I mean, the one who is not appointed by me is representing himself as an agent of me, and he's delivering the custody of the goods. The one with the knowledge purchase the goods, that he's having the one who is purchasing the goods has a sufficient knowledge that this person is not having the authority to sell. In case if he is purchasing the goods with a clear knowledge that then he will not get a clear title. In case if he is an innocent purchaser, he will get a clear title. Clear? And an ordinary agent who has no authority to sell cannot give a good title to the buyer. But a mercantile agent in possession of goods with the consent of the principal can convey a good title to a bona fide purchaser. So it means the one who is having the custody of the goods without the authority of the principal cannot give a better title to the owner. But if in case the agent is having the authority to sell the goods, can alone give a better title to the purchaser. Fine. You can if you take this case law, it is decided by the Honorable Court that it is stated that acting in an ordinary course of business of a mercantile agent means that person must act as it he were carrying out a transaction which he was authorized to carry out. Okay. And this case law, the plaintiff made an arrangement for disposal of some furniture, and tapestry belongs to him through P acting as an agent. Fine. So the plaintiff, I mean Lothar, is getting in, entering into an agreement with not this Harish, with someone else. He is entering into contract with the third party to supply all his furniture through his agent called as P. P obtained the possession of some of the articles by fraud, sold to the defendant, and absconded with the amount. Okay. Now, the one, I mean, P, who's the authorized agent of plaintiff, he obtained the possession of some of the articles from the plaintiff, and he sold to the defendant, who is no way connected, or the one who is not like the one to the one who is no way connected with the principal. Okay. So he sold the goods to the Harish, I mean the defendant here. Now the principal is suing against the Harish by stating that P is my by stating that P is the authorized agent of plaintiff, but he sold the goods in a fraudulent manner, so the Harish will not get a clear title on the goods. But it has been decided by the court that the intention of the agent is wrong. Although the intention of the agent is wrong, it is the duty of the plaintiff to monitor his agent. So it is the duty of plaintiff. So he has to sue against his agent to get back his money, not against the Harish. So when you are an innocent purchaser here, even though it is by the agent of the principal, if agent committed any offense, you can claim a good title when you are not aware of the fraudulent intention of the agent. Clear? Fine. So the question, however, arises whether the buyer gets a good title. Ordinarily, a buyer cannot a good title than what the seller had. So generally, in ordinary course of business, if the buyer receives that, will never get a good title on the goods received by him if there is any fraudulent transaction, and moreover he will not get a better title than seller. But in case if it is by the mercantile agent, if the buyer is innocent, he will get a better title. That is what section 26 says, and there are certain exemptions laid down in this rule in order to get a clear title, I mean a clear ownership. buyer gets a valid title binding upon the, so 27 speaks about the exemption. Okay, so when you will not get a clear title, generally you will get a clear title if you are not aware of the existing fact, but 27 is an exemption to this rule, which says that the purchaser should be the purchase should be from a mercantile agent. Okay, it should be like the purchase should be by the agent. I mean, you should purchase the goods from the agent. If you purchase from a third party or by the one who stolen the goods, like, you will not receive a good title. Okay, even for that also there are some certain exemption, but 27 lays down it lays down the rules that you will not get a clear title if it is not if you have not purchased the goods through the mercantile agent. The seller should be in possession of the goods or document of title. The mercantile agent should hold the custody of the goods. In case if you would have received the goods through the mercantile agent, like previously you would have hold the custody of the goods. If you have purchased from the agent who is having the authority to hold, then you can exercise, then you can claim clear title. Otherwise you cannot claim title on the goods. The third one is like the seller should have such possession, the consent of the true owner, and the sale should be made in the ordinary course of business. I mean, the agent should act in the ordinary course of business. The buyer should act in good faith. It means you should not aware of the fraudulent intention of the agent. The buyer should not have at the time of the transaction notice, and the seller wants to want of authority to sell. Okay. The next topic is how sale is made. Okay, how sale is made in a general term. When the goods, when there is a buyer, when there is a seller, when there is a transfer of property from one party to another party, there ends the sale. Okay, so there are certain conditions to be fulfilled for a valid sale. One is like there should be a buyer. If there is no buyer, you cannot sell the goods. If there is no seller, you cannot purchase the goods. If there is no price, this will not falls under the category of sale. Okay, and there should be a goods. So without goods you cannot sell the, I mean, without, if there is no goods you cannot sell anything. Yeah, so there should be a goods, and the one who is selling the goods should have a clear title on the goods. That is how the sale is made. So a contract of sale is either made by an offer, there should be an offer, and that offer should be accepted. So that is called as, so there should be an offer. For every contract there should be an offer, and the offer should be accepted by the acceptor. The contract may be provided for the immediate delivery of the goods or immediate payment of the price or both, or for the delivery of the payment by installment, or that the delivery of payment or both shall be postponed. Even it may be a credit based system also, it may be a credit purchase also. But once the property is transferred from one party to another party, when there is a sale, when there is an offer, when there is an acceptance, there should be a price. It is not that the price should be immediately paid, even it can be paid in future. So subject to the provision of any law time being enforced, the contract of sale may be okay. So it may be in writing or it may be in oral. You cannot say that if it is in oral, it is not valid before the law. Still, it has some. It is valid. It can be a word of mouth or it can be in writing. Okay. The next, the contract of sale is an agreement between the buyer and seller intending to exchange the property. As I told you earlier, there should be exchange of goods from one party to another party. If there is any exchange of property from one party to another party for a specific price, if there is an offer, if the offer is accepted by the purchaser, then it leads to proper sale. Now, the essentials of valid sale. So essential is nothing but there should be two parties. There should be minimum of two parties. One is the buyer and the second one is the seller. That is what Article 13 defines, that there should be a buyer who agrees to sell, who agrees to purchase the goods. There should be a seller and who agrees to sell the goods. There should be a goods for sale. If there is no goods, you cannot sell anything. So there should be a goods, and price must be fixed. It is not that you have to fix the price. Even you can fix the price based upon the situation of the, or based upon the condition of the goods. And it should be decided at the, in case you can, for example, you can enter into contract in the beginning of the stage, or you can also include in your contract that buyer as well as seller will not fix the price for the goods. The valuator will be fixing the price. If you give a right to the third party to fix the price, to value the price, only the third party can, I mean the valuator can alone fix the price of the goods. Okay. The next thing is like transfer of general property. These things we have discussed. So, okay. So what are all the formalities of contract of sale? There should be immediate delivery of goods, specific goods, immediate payment of the price, or both. Like even it can be immediate payment, or even it can be a installment payment. And the delivery, even the delivery and the payment can be postponed. It may be in the future period also. Okay. The next thing is, it is very important, that rule for fixing a price. There is a rule for fixing a price that if you're fixing any price, the product there is a rule that the price which you are fixing should be in, it should be in an affordable price. Fine. It depends upon the quality, it depends upon the quantity, and it depends upon the brand and everything. Okay. So there is a rule laid down by the Sale of Goods Act to fix the price for the goods. I mean, while entering into the contract, you should fix the goods for your price. Okay. And there should be a merchantable quality. For example, if I'm purchasing a pen, okay, the cost of the pen is 5 rupees. My intention is to resell the pen. At least it should go for 5 rupees, or at least it should go for minimum of 4 rupees. So it should have the merchantable quality. Okay. Merchantable quality before the market. Fine. So section 2 defines about the price, and section 9 says about the ascertainment of price. The contract of sale may be fixed by the contractor. The section 9 says about who can fix a price, and what should be the price. So generally the seller will be fixing the price. So the seller can fix the price. Even if the seller is allowing the purchaser to fix the price, even the purchaser can also fix a price for the goods. And reasonable price should be, subclass 2 says about the price where the price is not determined in accordance with the foregone provision, the buyer shall pay the seller a reasonable price. But reasonable price is a very big question here. What is reasonable depends upon the it depends upon the product. For if I am purchasing a bottle, the reasonable price is 100 or 200, or if it is a branded one, even the reasonable price is 1000. If I am purchasing a cell phone, the reasonable price is it may be 50,000 or 60,000. For that, I cannot pay 100 or 200. So there should be a reasonable price, and that reasonable price is a big question mark here, and everything depends upon the fact and circumstances of the each cases. So section 10 says about section 10 says about the deal with agreement to sell at valuation, where there is an agreement to sell goods on the term that price is to be fixed by the valuation of a third party, and such third party cannot or does not make such valuation. The agreement is thereby avoided. See, when I'm at the stage of agreement, I'm entering into contract, I'm telling that I'm mentioning in my contract that the price cannot be fixed by the seller as well as by the purchaser. The price can alone be fixed by the valuator. Okay, valuator means a third party. So if I am mentioning that it should be fixed only by the valuator, it can alone be fixed by the valuator. In case if the valuator is avoiding, in case if the valuator is not accepting to fix price for the goods, in case if the valuator is not fixing price for the goods, the contract may be avoided. Fine. The contract may be avoided. In case if any one party is not allowing the valuator to fix the price, the party which is not allowing the valuator to fix the price can sue against the the one who is disturbing the valuator from not evaluating the goods can be sued. Fine. So the innocent one can sue against the one who is not allowing the valuator to valuate the goods. Clear? So when subclass 2 says that where such third party is prevented from making the valuation by the default of the seller or buyer, the party not in fault may maintain a suit for damage against the party in fault. So you can sue against the against the one who is not allowing the valuator to valuate. Okay. Now we are going to see about the perishable goods. So perishable goods are the goods the goods which is perishable in nature. Fine. For the best example for perishable goods is fruits, vegetables, juice, which are perishable in nature, which cannot be stored for a very long period. So the goods which cannot be stored for a very long period falls under the category of perishable goods. Okay. So perishable goods. Section 7 says about the perishable goods. Section 7 says about the perishable goods. Goods perishing before making of contract. So what about the goods perished before making a, see, I'm entering into a contract for purchasing fruits, a basket of fruit. The seller, without knowing the knowledge of the condition of the goods, is entering into contract to deliver the goods without the knowledge that the goods is already perished. The goods is already damaged. Okay. So what happens to the contract? What happens to the goods which is already damaged, for which you have entered for a contract without knowing the actual status of the goods? That is what section 7 says. Where there is a contract of the sale of a specific goods, the contract is void if the goods, without the knowledge of the seller, have at the time when the contract was made perished or become so damaged as no longer to answer to their description contract. So section 7 is very clear that when you don't have when the intention is not to cheat the purchaser, when you are not aware that the goods is already damaged, the contract become void. Okay. So the contract is void if the goods is already perished. But the thing is the seller should not aware of the goods. In case if he is aware of the status of the goods, but still is entering into contract with the purchaser, now the innocent purchaser can sue against the fraudulent intention of the seller. Clear? Section 8 deals with it speaks about the in between period of the sale and the delivery of goods. Okay. The agreement to sell and delivery of goods. See, at the time of entering into contract, the goods is in proper condition, but before delivering the goods is damaged. Okay. So what happens to such kind of contracts? That is what we are going to see under section 8. You're getting the point? So section 7 says that when the goods is already perished without knowing the knowledge of the condition of the goods, if the seller is entering into contract to supply certain goods, the contract is void. But because the intention of the seller is not to cheat someone, right? It is the intention of the seller is not to cheat the purchaser. But section 8 says about when at the time of entering into the contract, the condition of the goods is good, but at the time of the delivery of the goods, the goods is damaged. What happens to the contract? That is what section 8 says. It becomes where there is an agreement to sell a specific goods, subsequently the goods without any fault of part of the seller or buyer perished or become so damaged as no longer to answer to their description in the agreement before the risk passes to the buyer, the agreement is thereby avoided. So section 7 is void, section 8 is voidable at the option of both buyer and seller. Even here, the buyer cannot sue against the seller for the delivery of the goods, and the seller cannot sue against the buyer for accepting the goods. Clear? Condition in warranty, which is very, very important. So condition in warranty is nothing but, we have only 15 minutes. I'll just go through in 5 minutes. Okay. Condition in warranty. So section 11 and 12 says about condition in warranty. Condition is nothing but the goods which the seller is delivering should have a merchantable condition. It should be in a good condition. If in case if there is any stipulation, I mean if there is any condition laid down that if for example I am into some electronic item business, okay. I'm running a chocolate factory. My specific condition is I am ordering a chocolate. My specific condition is that chocolate should be wrapped with a silver foil sheet, okay. So there is a condition, and at the same time I'm telling that I need the chocolate before this particular period. Or if it is a season, if it is a seasonable foods, if it is mango, I'm telling that it should be reached me before May. So there is a stipulation, there is a condition. Fine. If there is any condition, it is the duty of the seller as well as it is the duty of the purchaser to act according to the condition laid on by both the parties. Fine. So warranty is nothing but it's a additional thing given to the product. For example, like you would have seen a warranty, guarantee and all, okay. So guarantee is like the company will be giving 3 or 4 years guarantee. In case if anything happens to the goods, they'll be replacing the goods, I mean replacing the electronic item or the goods which is damaged. So warranties also, this you can also see some warranties. If you take some electronic item, they'll be giving a warranty for some for a specific part. So this concept brought by only because of this Sale of Goods Act. So section 11 says that stipulation as to time, unless a different intention appears from a term of the contract, stipulation as to time of payment are deemed to be the essence of the contract. This thing I have explained. Okay. So condition, let us see the difference between condition and warranty. Condition, as I told you, condition is the essential element for the contract, but warranty is not the essential condition. It is only a secondary thing which is supporting the contract. Fine. So I hope you would have remembered, I told you, right, when there is a breach in the condition, you cannot treat you can repudiate the contract, you can cancel the contract. When there is a breach in the warranty, you can claim only damages, you cannot cancel the contract. I told you in a simplest way that just take a condition as a big issue and take a warranty as a small issue. I taught you in the class that if there is any issue, if there is any breach in a condition, you cannot you can treat it as a warranty. For example, if I am placing an order for cell phone, instead of iPhone, they are delivering some Samsung or something like that. It means there is a breach in the contract. Fine. But instead of iPhone, I am placing a order for white color iPhone, but instead of that, they are delivering a golden color iPhone. It means that there is a breach in warranty. I hope you will understand the difference between condition and warranty. If the entire condition is breached, it falls under the condition. Only if there is any slight difference, it falls under the category of warranty. Okay. So condition is the essential purpose, whereas warranty is only a secondary purpose for the, it is a supporting thing for the condition. For the product. The second one is like, it is non-performance may be considered as a failure to perform the contract. In case if there is any, if the contract is not performed, it leads to failure to not perform the contract. But here it is not like that. So the when there is a breach in the condition, the aggrieved party, I mean the affected party, can repudiate the contract, like they can cancel the contract. But when you take warranty, they can claim only damages, they cannot cancel the contract. If there is any color change, you cannot cancel the contract. See, for example, if I'm ordering something in the Amazon, Okay, instead of black color sari, I'm getting red color sari. It means that there is a breach in the warranty. You cannot say that there is a breach in the condition. So there is a difference between condition and warranty. So what is the effect of breach of contract? We know that what will be the effect of breach of contract. The effect is like, you can when there is a breach of contract, the aggrieved party can treat the contract as a repudiated. You can treat that as a repudiated contract. In other words, if the seller fails to fulfill the condition, the buyer has the option to repudiate the contract or refuse to accept the goods. Even if there is any breach in the contract, you can refuse to accept the delivery of the goods. If the buyer has already paid, he can recover the price. In case, if you have, just take Amazon as a good example. See, when you are placing an order for a cash on delivery, you can return the goods if there is any changes in the goods. Okay. If you have already paid, you can return the goods and you can recover the money from Amazon in a later period. The effect of breach of warrant is the aggrieved party cannot repudiate, but they can only claim damages. This thing I have explained. Okay. It is sale by non-owner. It is actually an important topic. There is a maxim called nemo dat quod non habet. It means no one can give a better title to the goods what he does not have. It means that if only the owner of the goods can give a better title, the non-owner cannot give a better title. Because if A is getting, or if A is holding the possession of the goods by a third degree method, okay, or he is holding the stolen goods, he cannot exercise, he cannot claim that he is the original owner. So that is what this maxim says. No one can give a better title than the owner. Only the original owner can give a better title, clear ownership to the goods. That is what this maxim says. Section 27 says that where any goods are sold by the person to whom, not to the real owner of the goods, and sell them without a proper authority and consent from the real owner, the buyer acquires no better title to the goods than the seller had. But we have seen certain exemptions, right? So if you have received the goods from the mercantile agent, you will get a better title if you are unaware of the fact. And section 27 also lays down certain principle which says that if a thief sells of the stolen goods, the buyer will have the same title as the thief who sold him the goods. So in case if you are purchasing the goods from a thief, okay, the same status of a thief will be the status of the purchaser here. And if it is by a transfer by estoppel, there are some exemption to this rule. Generally, the non-owner will not get a clear title. There are some certain exemption to this rule. Transfer by estoppel. In case if it is by estoppel, if the owner is in case of the one who is not having the clear title is showing the owner, in case if the owner is silent there, by considering that like the owner is having the he's also accepting, I mean he's also interested to sell the goods. If if the innocent purchaser is purchasing the goods through an estoppel, he will get a better title. Fine. So the middleman along with the owner cannot cheat the innocent purchaser. That is what that is the reason why this rule, there are certain exemption to this rule. So if it is by an estoppel, you cannot, the new purchaser will be getting a proper title. Okay. And the next one is like if it is by an mercantile agent. This we have seen already. If it is by a mercantile agent, you will get a better title. The sale by several owner. If there are several owners for the goods, if any one of the owner is selling the goods, the innocent purchaser will be getting the clear title on the goods. Person with an voidable title conferring a valid title. So when the one who is holding the voidable title, the one who is holding the title the one who is not having the clear title, but he's informing that he is telling that he is holding the clear title, based upon the statement given by the one who is selling the goods, the one who purchased the goods will get a clear title on the goods if he is an innocent purchaser. Transfer by seller in possession after sale. This thing we will discuss in coming class. So rules as to delivery is nothing but it is the duty of the seller to deliver the goods within the time stipulated by the purchaser. So it is the duty that he has to deliver the goods in the proper place where the contract is agreed, or in case if the place is not decided, the purchaser, it is the duty of the seller to deliver the goods wherever the purchaser is requesting, or even the purchaser can take the delivery from the manufacturing unit or from the place where the contract is entered between. Okay, so this is the rule as to delivery. So it is the duty, generally it is the duty of the seller to sell the goods. It is the duty of the seller to deliver the goods to the purchaser, and he has to bear. Then it should be decided in the contract that who should bear the expenses. In case if there is no specific contract, then the seller has to bear the expense. If there is any specific contract which says that purchaser has to he has to bear the delivery expenses, then the purchaser has to bear the delivery expenses. Okay. I hope you all understood this topic. In case if we'll discuss this remaining topics in the upcoming session. Okay. Thank you all so much. And please stay at home. Please don't go outside. Please stay safe and stay at home. Thank you. Bye.